4 of our 4-part series, and we're going to break down cultural barriers in the wine industry. And we have Carlton McCoy and Tahira Habibi with us today. This particular webinar is sponsored. We have a presenting sponsor with Good Things Done Right. They are our social media guru. We love Allison Day, and she would love to say a few words. Unfortunately, she was pulled into another meeting, but she just wanted to let you guys know that she's very proud to be a part of the chamber that places a priority on learning, understanding, and being better. She believes with an open mind and openness to learning, we can be a better Napa Valley for all who visit, making this a safe and comfortable destination. She's committed to being a part of the challenge, or to the part of the change, and she's grateful to both the speakers for guiding us through this. And just a little bit about Tahira. She is the founder of the Hue Society and a sommelier. She has always had a passion for uplifting the Black community, and in 2017, she launched Hue Society as a safe place for the BIPOC community to learn, commune, and find resources in one place. She's been featured in Ocean Drive as one of the top 5 female sommeliers, VinePair, Upscale Magazine, David Banner Podcast, and Imbibe Magazine, to name a few. Her work is rooted in enhancing and empowering the community for both consumers and business owners. She has a passion to make an indelible impact in the wine industry. Simulation is not required. And then we have Carlton McCoy, Master Somm, CEO of Heights Cellars. He was named a Master Sommelier in 2013 at just 28 years old. Carlton was one of the youngest people and the second African American to earn this prestigious title. In 2018, Carlton became president and CEO of Heights Cellars in Napa Valley. In addition to his restructuring and implementing his vision for Heights Cellars, he has partnered with Tahira with the Hue Society to create the Roots Fund, a fund to empower underrepresented minorities in the wine industry by providing resources and financial support through educational scholarships, wine education, mentorship, and job placement. The Roots Fund is committed to investing into the Black wine community to provide opportunities to those seeking a career in all aspects of wine. And we'll get to learn more about that today, and we're really excited. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Tahira.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. As Elizabeth said, I'm Tahira, and Carlton is joining me. Give me a second. I will pull up my presentation as, there we go. So today we are going to talk about breaking down cultural barriers within the wine industry specifically, because that is where Carlton and I are the most suited. This is our wheelhouse. A lot of what we're going to talk about is based in fact, specifically cultural to the Black community, and also from our different perspectives, as we have both come from the same space, economically and socioeconomically, but we kind of, our paths kind of veered once we got into the wine industry in some respects, but the experience was ultimately the same in many respects. So I will, so we're going to go through our team. Obviously, it's Carlton and I. I will let Carlton introduce himself if he would like to take the floor.
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for taking interest in this topic. Myself and Tahira are very genuinely appreciative of. I've obviously been really excited about joining the community here in Napa Valley, and I'd say for the most part, everyone's been very, very welcoming to me, which has been great, and been really exciting, sort of trying to find my stride here and where it all sort of fits in. I think that this presentation, this discussion, we really want it to be a discussion. We have a presentation we're going to talk about. I think some of the barriers to entry, both on as a consumer and also as a potential employee into the wine industry, because I think we all could unanimously agree that we don't see as much representation in the industry that we could see, and that I'd hope most of us would want to see. And as we know, I'd say both the media and political parties have really politicized any race-based conversation, and I hope that we can start by just sort of disarming that and saying that that really isn't what this is about. This is about talking about the cause and potentially solutions to getting more Americans interested in wine and employed in the wine industry, and making it a much more exciting, diverse industry that represents the demographics of our country. And I don't think that has anything to do with any political association. Unfortunately, we do know that that is the reality of what it's become, but this isn't really about that at all. This is really, this isn't about the blame game. This isn't finger pointing. This is about talking about what we see are the reasons why both consumers and employees are not engaging with the wine industry, the problems, and then hopefully discuss some solutions together.
Right. So Carlton, why don't you give a little bit, a snippet of your background and your journey through the wine industry to where you are, how did you got to where you are now?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I was born in 1984. If you're familiar with the history of D.C., especially in the late 80s and early 90s, it was definitely one of the murder capitals of the country, and a very impoverished city. Massive economic and racial and social divide within the city. It was a bit of a metaphor for the state and the nation. And I was really fortunate, even through what were some very lowly funded public schools, to have a program called CCAP that recruited me from high school to go into culinary school. So I went to the CIA in Hyde Park. I am mixed race, by the way. I should mention that. My mother is Jewish. My father is Black American. And I moved to New York to go to culinary school. And once I left culinary school, made the decision to move into the service industry. And I was introduced to wine through the service side of things. I started to study to be a sommelier once I found out what a sommelier was, and that it was actually a career path. And I had very key people during my career that sort of gave me some guidance as to what you could actually do in the wine industry. Because coming from a family where no one actually consumed wine, or I never saw wine around, I didn't know it was an industry where you could actually have a career. I didn't know people made money selling, producing wine. I didn't know anything about it. So I was really fortunate to have people that were very generous with their time and their guidance and mentoring to sort of point to the various paths and allow me to choose. When I chose a path, they really sort of supported me in studying. I chose the sommelier path, being a master sommelier. So I continued to study and moved down back to DC. I was working for Eric Ziebald, who actually used to be the chef at the French Laundry here for a number of years. We opened a restaurant in DC. I was a sommelier there. And then I moved to Aspen and became the wine director at the Little Nell in Aspen, Colorado. I was there for about 9 years and passed my master sommelier exam while I was there. And then moved here to Napa in April of last year.
And I have a similar story. I am from North Philadelphia. My path to wine was also through restaurants, except I was the hostess at a restaurant. In that restaurant, it was a hotel that owns the restaurant, and they happen to have a wine program in which they would pay for your wine classes if you were interested. And so I took that up. And so I worked during the day, I took classes at night, and eventually I moved to Miami, where I opened the St. Regis. That was actually my first nerve-wracking wine experience. And if you are thinking about that in context from a person who went from not growing up with wine, not really knowing anything like about the wine space, kind of the same as Carlton, not even understanding that you could make a career out of it, to kind of being thrust into one of the most luxury wine programs in the country. It's culture shock, but it's also eye-opening to see the lack of people who look like me, who did not have access to those things in the same way. And so after a while, I went through I worked at the St. Regis, I worked at a couple other places as my career grew. And then eventually I just started working for myself, more so creating community events for wine for the Black and Brown community to get them more involved and engaged in the space where there was a complete void. And so I founded an organization before the Roots Fund, but the Roots Fund is the bigger organization because it's more of an umbrella for everything else. Not Roots Fund, sorry, Hue Society, forgive me. And I'll talk more about Hue Society a little bit later, but we just wanted to give a little background on our journeys. So now we will talk about barriers to consider. And there are 4 main barriers when we are talking about engaging with the Black and Brown community as far as getting them into a comfortable space with wine. And by comfortable, we also mean safe. And we'll talk a little bit about representation, biases, career paths, and resources. So Carlton can take it away with the first barrier is marketing.
Yeah. So, when we look at, marketing is, we look under that umbrella. This barrier we really see being something that affects both the consumer side as well as the potential employee side. And that's really looking at how the beverage of wine is marketed in America, and the power of marketing. We look at even outside of wine, any consumer good. I like to use the example of laundry detergent because it's something that we all use, hopefully. When I was growing up, I remember we never saw, for instance, Tide marketed with anyone of color. And the families were always white, and the families were always what they call a traditional family. It was a straight couple with 2 kids running around the house in this big single family home with a golden retriever. And that was the image, I guess, that they wanted to project of their ideal consumer, the person they wanted to attract. With the understanding that marketing is incredibly expensive. It takes an enormous amount of time and effort to build those campaigns. You have to deduct from that it's very intentional, right? Marketing is, whole campaigns are built around attracting a certain consumer, regardless of what the product is. And when we look at Tide, for example, I very vividly remember about 5 years ago seeing my first Tide commercial with a mixed race couple. And I was like, whoa, I noticed it. And then about a year later, I saw a Black family feature in the Tide commercial, and you start seeing, whoa, this is a very new thing. And I had become so accustomed to not seeing anyone of color marketed with any well-known products that sort of became the norm. James Baldwin talks about it very often when he talks about being raised as a Black child in America, being raised in a country where you never see a Black face on anything that you're purchasing, that sometimes you don't find out until you're older when you look in the mirror and you don't look like the picture on the billboard or in the commercial. That idea of, okay, well, do they actually consider me an American, that idea? Well, when we market a product, we have to understand that there's intention there and understand the impact that it can have. So if the intention is to attract people of color, then it would behoove all of us to, when we look at our marketing efforts, that's my company included, to really look at who we're using in those marketing efforts, right? Photography, videography, event, pamphlets. Because what it tells a consumer is that you're welcome here. I see you as a valued consumer of my product. I can see you align with my product. So it's a very, very powerful thing. So that's obviously on the consumer side, but on the employee side, what you've done is you've said that this is a person that I can see interacting with the beverage or this product and somehow being in business with this product. And obviously by producing a stronger consumer base of people of color, you'd have now integrated that product in the household, introducing that product with the next generation, right? Now that next generation is used to seeing that product around the house. They're used to seeing wine on the table. They see their family drinking wine. So when they grow up, they can see themselves aligned with it and potentially start to look at it as a career path. So we see marketing as really something that sends a very clear message to any demographic that you want to see them align with your product. we had a hard look at it with even our new brands when we're marketing. It may seem posed, but actually all marketing is posed and it is forced. When we go out to hire models for photo shoots, we're going out and hiring for a particular look. We don't just grab Joe Schmo off the street. We want, let's say you're going with a very trendy brand. You want people who look like beautiful people, right? Whatever your goal is, there's an intention there. So again, if the intention is to attract a more diverse, a culturally diverse group of consumers, we see marketing as a very easy way to send a very clear message as to who's welcome to interact with your product.
And to follow that, I think if we're talking about the specific demographic, particularly Black and brown people, have a very unique viewpoint where they're very much attracted to things that they see themselves in, and they do not feel included in things that they do not. So it's very black and white, that's a metaphorically, but it is very black and white in that sense. From a psychological standpoint, if we don't see ourselves, then we do not feel included and we will not engage in it. So as far as recruiting efforts, we can talk about cultural biases, hiring practices, HBCUs, which is historically Black colleges and universities, and Black organizational partners. I think Carlton will take the cultural biases and hiring practices, and I'll chime in at HBCUs.
Great. So when we look at cultural bias, this is something that every human has. It exists in every community. We are tribal by nature. We're very comfortable being around people who sometimes come from the same places. It gives us comfort when we talk to them that maybe they speak the same way we do. Definitely if they look and dress the same way. It just makes us feel comfortable because it's far more predictable. It's what we're comfortable being around. It's who we're comfortable talking to. It's the reason why a lot of children have such big culture shocks when they go to college and so forth, right? They're now forced into this social experiment of interacting with people they've never had to talk to before. It becomes difficult to relate. When we're looking at recruiting and hiring, subconsciously is very, it becomes easier to understand why people tend to hire people that sound like them, look like them, and share similar cultural experiences. It's because it's more predictable and it makes you feel real comfortable. And, obviously this is a very big hot topic for us here when we're saying, as we're growing as a company, of saying, are you doing that? And it's not ever pointing a finger because I don't ever think that's productive. It's really about the person, searching within themselves and saying, okay, am I hiring the best person for the job? And the best person for the job, we might have to redefine that sometimes. I've looked at situations where we look at resumes and say that person, while actually their qualifications may be less, there's something about where that person comes from and their journey that makes them a more interesting person for the job that may add something that we don't have in the company. Knowing how to use a computer program, to me, is not as valuable of an asset than someone who has a journey that's much more interesting. I can send that person to a class and pay $500 for them to learn how to use the computer program, and they can do it pretty proficiently. So looking at trying to, within yourself, and try to implant that ideology in the people in your company who are doing the hiring, whether it's you or someone else, of looking at outside of what you're comfortable with and pulling yourself out of your comfort zone to see, am I hiring a diverse group of people, which is going to obviously strengthen my company? There's tons of research done into the importance of a diverse group of cultures in a company to strengthen it and to set it up for future success, especially in consumer products. When we look at, if the goal is to attract a more diverse group of clientele, then it would probably behoove a company to have someone within that company who understands that culture, to give them that point of view, to say exactly what Tahira said, which is like, I know those people, that's my community. What I'm telling you is, if we do this, that won't work. They'll see right through this. If you want to attract this demographic, you got to do it this way, right? And the dividends that can return are huge. And then moreover, just what that brings to your culture, your company, as far as an energy in the room, which is obviously something that's very difficult to quantify. For people to go into their office and see a really diverse group of people, it does send a psychological message as the type of company they work for and the values that they hold. Again, how do you quantify feelings and emotion is very difficult to do. If we could do that, we'd all be billionaires. But it's very difficult to do. And then looking at hiring practices, right? What's the SOP for approving employees? Are you putting too much power in the hands of one person to make that hiring decision, right? We do multiple layers of interviews in my company for a reason. I interview every employee that's hired in the company for that reason, because you actually don't know what type of, sort of biases that hiring manager may have. Whether they're aware of them or not, they may exist. And we discussed every hire, right? We're hiring a lot of people right now, and we have for the last 6 months. So I've been doing a lot of interviews, but it's very important to me because your employees are your company. We often think that our companies are brands, but brands are temporary. But in the sense that they don't carry a lot of value. Brands can't run a company. People run a company. They have to make the decisions every day. So making sure that you're not putting too much hiring power in the hands of one person. We always say that our team hires other team members. One person does not hire them. I don't ever hire an employee that is not approved by people that report to me because I don't have to work with them typically, right? I run multiple wineries. They have to work with them, but I have to approve everyone. But, and then lastly, a part of this is for companies that do have boards. The importance of having a diverse board cannot be more overstated. It's you can set up all of the hiring procedures that you like, and you can have, I know this may sound a little odd, but you can have a room that looks really diverse, but it doesn't mean the values and how you run your company have enough perspectives in it and how the structure of the company is built. And a board of a company builds the structure and how a company operates. So looking around the room and the table at your board of directors and going, okay, have we produced on the surface a very diverse company, but all of the leadership and the decision makers are not? Then you sort of you have a very diverse room of puppets, but no one who's actually pulling the strings, having a different point of view and a different perspective. And why that is important, both at the high level and in the entry level, is we're very fortunate to have what we like to market all the time as a melting pot in this country, which I would say that we all look at as an asset. But that's only as valuable as you use that asset, right? Just to look out in the country and see diversity, but don't see it inside your own company and how you're operating, you're not really using the asset and utilizing what I think we could all value as what makes this country very unique. So next, Tira's going to go into recruiting efforts as far as, now you've made that decision, you want to recruit, how do you do it?
Right, so HBCUs are an enormous untapped market, particularly for brands that are looking to hire Black and Brown employees. The research shows that on average, most companies go to Ivy League companies versus HBCUs because they deem them as a higher tier of people, right? So that in itself is an implicit bias. But some of the highest leaders in this country, in positions in this country, have been graduates of HBCUs as well. I mean, we can talk about Kamala Harris at this point, but we're not going to go into a political conversation. But she is an example. She is a graduate of Howard University. There are many people like her, and that is a very big segment of hiring that is ignored. So that is something that you can look at, as well as Black organizational partners. And what we mean by that is organizations such as Greek organizations. Historically, Black Greek organizations. You can look at organizations like Hugh Society. You can look at organizations that focus on the high achievement of Black and Brown people in a specific space and tap those as well, because I can guarantee you that in every segment of a market, there is a counter segment, a more niche segment that is devoted to Black and brown people, because historically we have been left out of that market. So if you start researching that and look for those groups, you'll definitely find a ton of organizations in which you can partner with, or lean into, or find someone who is privy to those organizations and tap into those as well. We're going to move on to socioeconomics, which will include access, lack of resources, and the disconnect from social circles. As far as access goes, the reason why it was important for Carlton and I to kind of give a bio from where we come from, because that is a direct access, right? We did not see wine growing up. We did not have access to images of wine with people that look like us. So we did not believe that that was a part of our world. But there was someone who came in that created an access point for us to get into it. Now, we create that access early on or more frequently, then we will have a more diverse group of people in the wine industry, in the wine space, and in our companies. This is one of the primary functions of the Roots Fund. When we say lack of resources, we again are talking about specifically the wine industry, in which there are, wine is a very expensive space, right? It's not like it's an easy thing to kind of get your hands on to a bottle of La Tâche here and there. So when we say lack of resources, in order to become successful in the wine industry, you have to study, you have to have the resources to study, you have to have the resources to be able to level your career up. And those include mentors, those include financial resources, those include being able to get into rooms and spaces that you traditionally would not have been thought of. So being able to create those resources or offer those resources to Black and brown people is a huge barrier, breaking down a huge barrier for socioeconomics as far as that community goes. Carlton will cover the disconnect of social circles and the historical context there.
Great. So, we obviously know that, our nation for years had legally imposed racial separation through Jim Crow laws and redlining, just to name a few. We obviously now, and I think a lot of the country has been made aware of the economic impact of that. But there's another part of that which people have seen left out, which is the disconnect of social circles, and what that separation of people, what that does as far as their access and ability to gain access to certain industries. We going back to sort of the recruiting efforts, along with those social circles, whether they be alumni organizations or just social circles, we often see people be recruited and hired for jobs, sometimes even before jobs are posted, right? It's the formality of posting a job, but, my friend's son, I think, would be great for this job, or, let me just go to my alumni organization. There's going to be someone there. I want to, support those guys and get those in. And even just the introduction to the wine industry as a whole through those social circles that, a lot of people of color were not allowed to be introduced to certain industries, in most industries, which prohibited the potential growth economically and in advancement in careers. So we definitely want to look at that when we're looking at people of color coming into the industry, is understanding that the barriers are typically not a lack of interest. Obviously, access through recruiting efforts and lack of marketing produces that. The resources for those who are still dealing with, the separation and wealth. And then lastly, just a general separation because of, race separation. Black Americans especially have been perceived, and especially through media, as a lower class in America for a number of years. So wine being a beverage and a consumer good that's always marketed as something that's luxury, by nature, these two wouldn't associate themselves with each other. So you don't see, that's one of the reasons you don't see wine, even very entry-level wine, associated with Black people, right? We look at what is the average bottle cost in America retail. It's somewhere around, on the low end, around $8 to $10. Well, Black Americans drink spirits and so forth that are actually far more expensive than that. So why are they choosing that instead of, instead of wine? Why are they not choosing that? It's because socially, they just don't see themselves associated with it because of those separations in culture. Wine was always associated with upper class and white Americans, and not them. They almost look at it as a bit of you're a bit of a traitor by drinking that. Like, what do you? That's not our beverage, sort of thing. Because socially, we didn't interact with that. So that's something really to keep in mind, whether we're looking to market for some Black consumers or you're looking to hire Black Americans. If someone's in that wine shop buying a bottle of wine, or if they're applying for the job, they've overcome a ton of social hurdles just to interact with the product.
Right, and then to go in and interact with the product and be faced with more implicit bias, i.e., you like sweet wine, or the difference in how you are positioning the sale or the waiter or whatever to a Black couple versus to a non-Black couple, i.e., you automatically are saying, hey, you want some Moscato, you want something sweet, this is the lack, and then you ask the other people what their preference is, and so just that bias right there is a huge barrier, which stops people in their tracks from enjoying wine or growing and learning in that space as well.
Yeah.
So forward-facing positions, we're talking about career paths and added value from our point of view. Carlton will tackle the career paths, and I will speak on the value and point of view.
Yeah, so we touched on the importance of what I see of having a very diverse workplace. But one thing that's very important is to actually have forward-facing employees. When we talk about the Roots Fund, one of the I'd say career paths that we see a lot of potential is definitely in winemaking. But that only goes so far as people can actually see them as employees, forward-facing through marketing, and through tasting rooms, through management, where people can actually see those people represented in your company. And how you do that and what positions those are, obviously completely up to you, but there is an added value both for consumers and potential employees to actually having those employees forward facing and not just back of the house, topping barrels. That obviously is very important. And I'm not insinuating that just like everyone we hire in the wine business shouldn't start from the bottom and work their way up. But when there is that opportunity for a forward-facing position, there is a lot of value to having a person that people can actually physically see.
Yeah, and Carlton and I spoke about even visiting Napa, right? So, having, as Black people come to visit the different wineries, seeing people who look like you will make them more comfortable and more likely to return to those spaces when they feel comfortable. And that's also is when we're talking about safe spaces, we're not just talking about safe working spaces where you're addressing those things, but we're also talking about the welcoming of consumers coming into your spaces and, making sure that they are seeing a likeness in some way, even if that is you have somebody on your marketing team that is Black, because the influence is there. You can see it and we can tell, right? So adding that value of making sure that we are hiring people who are diverse that other people can see is incredibly important, but also considering the value that Black culture adds to America as a whole is incredibly important. And that needs to be authentic. It can't be something that you are just siphoning at your will to increase your company. Like, there's a difference between an authentic person working in a space and adding that value and that influence versus siphoning something that you saw on the internet and trying to recreate it. I think those things are incredibly important, particularly for marketing. All of these things are intertwined as we go through. You can obviously see that we're talking about the same thing as they're interconnected through the barriers and how to break them down. So that will be the next thing that we discuss is recommendations for growth. So we have equity workers, which we will explain what that is. We have educational recruitment partnerships and cultural consumer opportunities. Carlton, do you want to take equity workers?
Sure. Well, I'll just start with, when you look at, and I'll just stay with, I do a lot of work with the quartermaster sommeliers. as a master sommelier. And it's something that we've taken a big look into our organization with and saying, okay, well, where are the issues? And often understanding, well, sometimes just looking in of yourself is really not enough, and it's actually not the right path. If you do feel like you have a problem, in my opinion, I think, hiring people that bring, that can come in and give you an outside perspective. Because if it's your SOP, it's just the way you operate, it's going to be very difficult for you to see where there could be any bias or where you could have an issue. I think bringing people in to look at your systems. We brought in actually 2 separate firms for the Code of Master Sommeliers to look at everything from the way that we were projecting the organization to examinations, how we were awarding the exams, how they were structured, where test locations were, literally every aspect of what we did to make sure that they weren't biased. And there were things that stood out to them that were blatant, that we didn't think were issues. And they're like, no, this is why, and this is actually a big issue. We never really considered it. Even myself. And for us, that is super, super valuable. And then there's obviously the training of understanding, words like diversity and inclusion, understanding what they mean, and having people look at your company and give you sort of, I guess, some pointers and some feedback as to how you can do that. Because again, there is the one side of it, which is, it's probably the right thing to do. And then there's the other side, which is, how it can affect your business positively and affect your top and bottom lines. Because I think that's something that can translate to everyone. I don't expect everyone to overnight turn their company into the United Colors of Benetton, but I do hope that everyone could see the value it brings to your company, having those point of views, understanding how to market to various demographics, and also making those consumers feel comfortable when they arrive. To hear him mention it, and I really want to reiterate it, it's a really big point. When people see their kind in front-facing positions, they feel welcomed, especially if that demographic has historically been excluded and not welcomed in a lot of public-facing places. That's really, really powerful for people. It's a shock. It's a very pleasant surprise. What I can say is they're not expecting to see it because they haven't seen it in a lot of places. This is not exclusive to the Napa Valley. It's in the wine industry in general, and it's not exclusive to the wine industry. In the world of luxury, they haven't seen a lot of it. So when they see it, not only are they pleasantly surprised, they're incredibly loyal, right? If the Black community walks in, they see a luxury winery with a Black winemaker, I'm going to put some money on the fact that you're going to see your sales in the Black community go up exponentially. Because we really do support people in those positions, whether they be in music or fashion or the food industry or whatever it is. We do support our own in the luxury world community because we know how rare it is. So I think bringing people in to train your company, one, for liability's sake, to make sure that you don't have an issue, right? We know how expensive those lawsuits are, and you don't want to create an environment, seriously, that would create that environment in general. But then you definitely don't want the legal backlash from, what would be essentially a fault within your company. And then lastly, the dividends and the revenue that can be created from these trainings are the return on the investment is huge.
Yeah, and I would like to end that by saying that there is a huge difference between diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that difference needs to be celebrated and understood as well, because while you can have diversity and inclusion, and that can be celebrated, equity can still be the little guy here where, you're not paying people what they should be paid because of their race or, their sex or position. So that's why equity workers are incredibly important, so that you do understand what those differences are, because a lot of people are, champion the diversity and inclusion, but leaving out the equity part. The next thing that we are going to discuss is educational recruitment and partnerships, working with organizations that provide access to communities. So when we say that, what we mean is working with organizations such as Hue Society. When we were discussing the other day, we spoke about some wineries may be wanting to throw their own diversity events and stuff like that, and why Elizabeth asked this question, like, why wouldn't Black people come to that? And, what is the trust factor there? And it's because traditionally and historically, we have not been a part of that. So when you start thinking about buying dollars, spending money, spending dollars, particularly the Black dollar in general, we're talking about trillions. And then when you start seeing that applies to your industry, and now you want to come in to sponsor something to get access to that community dollar, is a lot different than you adding value to that community by actually creating programming that helps elevate in that community, that instead of hiring that helps elevate that community, like those things. And so when we say it's a trust factor, a lot of times where you're going to find the most benefit is actually adding value into the organizations that do provide that access, coming to those organizations from a holistic standpoint and saying, hey, we really want to partner with you. We want to help you grow so that you can help grow the community. Those things are incredibly important, and we see the value in that. We can tell when people are pandering and when people are authentic in their approach to wanting to change and really wanting to add diversity and inclusion into their spaces and their programming. So that's what we mean by working with organizations that provide that access. There are organizations that are already doing the work. Instead of starting one of your own, help them to grow and to function, properly. And the last thing that we're going to discuss before we start taking questions is cultural and consumer opportunities, which kind of ties into the partnership thing. But Carlton had a thought on it, and I'll round it off.
Yeah, so what I'll say is to build upon what Tahira was mentioning about co-marketing with organizations. It's also co-marketing with Black-based events. We see this often where if you're trying to market to a demographic that's outside of your normal demographic, especially for it's a product where they don't normally interact with, partnering with events that where there's already a really high following, whether it be fashion-based events, food-based events. When I worked in Aspen, Snowmass had Black Ski Week, and they would have 500 to 600 Black couples that would come out and ski in Snowmass that weekend. Well, and they have all these planned events. Well, that's a really great way to market your product to high net worth Black Americans, right? Tahira herself, through the Hue Society, does the Black Wine Experience, does those events a couple times a year, right? Those are great events where you can go, okay, great, how do we partner with you to really, market our product directly? It tends to be a lot cheaper than throwing your own events, as we know, whether it be, small underwriting or, and product gives, whatever it be, big charity events, big art auctions, right? The Black community within the last 10 years have become some of the biggest purchasers of and collectors of art, especially really well-known African-American artists. So I think looking at these opportunities, whether they be music, fashion, food, whatever they are, trying to find those organizations and events and partnering with them, it actually becomes a very, I'd say a very low-cost way to market in a safe space where they trust the event, they trust the organization, and that gives you a better buy-in. You sort of been vetted, right, for the community. And that's not just the Black community, that's the Latino community, that's the Asian community. Each one of those communities has their own, culture-based events, and integrating your product into those events in a very discreet and classy way is one of the best ways to legitimately market to them.
And I would also end that by saying allowing people to do things through their culture and not try to overstep that, meaning, Black people have a certain type of music that they like. So do Asian people, so do, different groups. Take music, take art, take, whatever the facet is, allowing them to experience that through their culture and not try to have them assimilate into the mainstream culture of whatever you think that should look like. Or, when we're talking about wine, the luxury of it, because you can have, and I saw this actually on Heights' Instagram, you can have barbershop discussions, which are a very big thing in the Black community in luxury wine. So, that is an example of allowing the culture to guide how they want to consume your product versus you trying to mandate how we should be consuming it. It would be a lot easier. Things will flow a lot better, and you will get a lot better response and a lot more people interested in that, because we don't have to code switch into what it's supposed to be. Finally, you know, we're going to talk very quickly about the Roots Fund and Hue Society and how we are intertwined. We have discussed both of these things on and off throughout this presentation, and I want to leave time for questions. So as we talk about the Hue Society, it's a very unique organization that I founded years ago as a safe space for Black and Brown people to be able to, again, come in and experience, learn, celebrate wine through our own experiences. So as Carlton was speaking, he mentioned music, he mentioned art, he mentioned, you know, culinary. Those are all things that we have a unique point of view on. And so I felt like it was very important for us to be able to do our thing, our way, and again, like experience wine and learn about it without the pressure of having to code switch, which when you walk into fine dining, you find that a lot, like you have to look a certain way. Like, you know, when I was working, I would never be able to wear my big earrings, and I love big earrings. I had a problem with that, you know, having to look the way they want you to look. And as a result, feeling like you don't belong, or you're not as knowledgeable, or, you know, as much of an expert on the subject if you do not. And so we're very unique in that we are the first organization to focus on specifically the culture and cultural experiences, and be able to create events and things of our likeness and grow the community and make people feel comfortable and get more people that look like us engaged in the wine space. We also focus on consumer and brands. So, you know, we champion Black brands because that's a very underrepresented demographic. We also champion consumer education through inviting and experiential type things. So we have both facets, we have both things going. And I just think that it's an incredible opportunity to be able to further people's career and interest in wine, which is why the Roots Fund was created, because we needed to be able to have something that created access and inclusion from our space into different pathways into the wine industry. And Carlton and I spoke about this a lot, as far as when we come into this space, we're kind of indoctrinated into thinking that you can only be a som or a winemaker, when there are a ton of other careers in the wine industry in which we can go into and pass. And we really wanted to open that up. You know, it's not just about CMS, it's not just about WSET. That is not the only way that people can learn and become official, or, you know, what do we call certified or whatever in this industry, and be taken seriously. There are many pathways, and a lot of the problem with that is that access to the financial backing to be able to go into those things and do those things and be great. Job placement, mentorship, like the whole development of a person's career path from beginning to end, or from midpoint to end, is very important for the Roots Fund. And I'll let Carlton speak a little bit more to, you know, the vision and mission on that as well.
Yeah, so, you know, we looked at, during this time, there was a lot of, there were many organizations that had just sort of popped up, and, you know, after long conversations, frankly, we didn't see a lot of them being really impactful in making changes that would affect our community, but also our industry in a very positive way. So, you know, the sort of three focuses for the Roots Fund are: one, recruitment and awareness. So making it very clear that the wine industry is an industry where you can have a very fulfilling and very passion-driven career, and making it aware of what the different paths are, right? And next is education, experiential. Once we find a great candidate, we vet them, and we sort of just, you know, help them decide what path. You know, we put them in a situation where they can gain the education and experience necessary to actually, you know, fulfill a position. So that could be the Code of Master Sommeliers or the Institute of Master of Wine. It could be internships in wineries and wine shops, or with distributors or importers. It also could be a viticulture school. We've already had some incredible conversations with UC Davis and Fresno State and Sonoma State and so forth, that are very interested in what we're doing.
Burgundy.
Say again?
In Burgundy.
Yeah, so we're partnering with the Enology School in Beaune to offer a few internships every year where they go over there for a few months and then be guaranteed an internship with a Burgundian winemaker. So things that give them the real life education, skills, and experience to really play a role in a company and be very useful. And lastly is really bridging the gap and using our influence to get them just a foot in the door to even get interviews into companies. I truly believe in my heart the worst thing you could ever do is give someone a job. I don't believe in it. I think that people need to earn what they get because they know value it. When someone is given an opportunity to get an education and experience, they take advantage of that. And then you essentially introduce them to these companies, these wineries, and so forth, and allow them to get their own job. I feel that you'll have much more long-lasting results, and they know they earned it. We were really fortunate this year, even though we only just started the Roots Fund about 4 months ago, that we've already had some really great talks about big endowments from major companies. And those obviously help us to secure big scholarships to places like UC Davis and so forth, where it's very expensive to help fund enrichment trips for people to go and do internships abroad. But also, we've already been able to place a couple interns in wineries here in the Napa Valley, which has been great. And the response has been really positive. And we essentially work as a vetting organization as well. So when we send you a candidate, this is someone that we think aligns themselves with the values that a luxury winery or a luxury wine company would value, but also work ethic and focus and commitment. Those are all things that we value. So again, it's really about recruitment and education awareness, experiential and skill building, and then job references.
Well, I know this was supposed to end at 1. Elizabeth, do we have a few more minutes to take some questions or?
Yeah, I think we should absolutely have we've got at least 4 more minutes to open up for questions. I haven't seen anything in the chat yet, or if anybody wants to unmute themselves. If the conversation's flowing, I'm okay with it. So if you have a question, type it in the chat oh, here we go. Thank you, Stephanie. You mentioned barbershop discussions, calling out my own ignorance. What is that?
So there's a couple of ritualistic things in the Black culture, particularly what we call the hood, urban cities, and a lot of the heart of things go down in barbershops. So we have political discussions, you have basketball discussions, sports, while you're getting your haircut, it's kind of like a cleansing, like you're just talking about things. LeBron James has a show, I think it's on HBO, right, Carlton? And it's called The Shop, and they're referred, it's for the barbershop. And so, they're sipping wine, they're talking about things, and just kind of how we relate to each other.
I obviously miss that culture dearly. I lost my hair at around the age of 20, but growing up, it was a big part of how I related with my community.
Yeah, it's the same thing with
That's why I put the beard. I would have a reason to go back. So
yeah,
they can do your beard. It's a barber shop. Beard is right. Very good. What are some things Height Cellars is doing around the diversity, equity, and inclusion? Like, are there some really solid examples that you can provide us?
Sure. So it's a very multi-tiered company, as all wineries are. So obviously, as we know, and this sounds really silly, but probably one of the least diverse parts of our entire business actually is the farming industry. It's a bit of a monopoly with Latin Americans. So what we did is we actually had a talk with Mark Neal of Jack Neal and Sons, who does all our farming, looking and saying, would you be interested in actually taking on, farming interns from people who are not that community? And he was very open to it. It's not something that he even thought of, because as you know, even recruiting for those jobs is very difficult. It's not easy work. But there are people who are interested in that side of the business because it is the heart of what we do. Then there's a production side. That obviously was a part of the industry where I saw the most potential initially. I come from the culinary world, and there's a lot of parallels to kitchen life. It's grueling work, crazy hours, hard labor. It's labor intensive, and you have to use your palate. So I saw a lot of parallels there, and that's obviously an industry where the Black community has begun to really, really dominate. And I saw a lot of opportunity there. So what we did was, and again, I don't believe in anyone being given a job, is we met with our all of my winemakers this year, and we talked about, and I oversee 5 other brands that are in development as well, and they all have separate wineries throughout the valley. I met with all the winemakers, and I told them about the Roots Fund. I told them about what we were doing, and I wanted to make sure that they were open to receiving interns and employees from the Roots Fund, and unanimously. And I made it very clear, I'm not forcing this down your throat. This is separate from Heights Cellar and what we do, but I'd love you to be engaged. We already brought one intern in, Darren Clark, who was a line cook in I believe, North Carolina. He started actually today working with Nico Cuevo, who was the former winemaker at Costa Brown. He's making wine for us down in Coonsville. He has his first crush today with some Sauvignon Blanc, which is really great. And then there's the part on hospitality. I was very, very clear that I wanted to have a very diverse group of wine educators in all of our tasting rooms. That was a priority for me, because I want our guests to feel comfortable when they come. And they took it very seriously, and our entire hospitality team made sure that we did have a very diverse team as we rehired for the new tasting room for Heights, and as we look forward at all future brands. And the next one that we're working on is obviously the regional sales side. We are starting to build that team. So as we build that team, we're making sure that we are again, it's not about who always is the most qualified on paper by the traditional definition of that. It's looking at who's going to bring value to our sales team and have a very clear understanding of how to appeal to what is a big growing number of people of color who are in buying positions, who own wine shops, who own restaurants and bars. Being able to relate to that buyer and knowing what they value and how to communicate with them. It's a big thing. It's how to communicate with them. That has been probably the hardest part of our business to integrate in, because people of color haven't been let into that part of the business very often. I will call out, I think Gallo has done a very good job of that historically and very recently. But a lot of companies were not hiring Black salespeople for their wine brands. So that's been a really difficult part of the industry for us to even find candidates that are applying, or even where you could recruit from. So that's something we're struggling the most on, but it's what we're focused on building. But also just a general awareness of culture. We made Juneteenth a paid holiday for our company. And we did that because it was very clear to me that 99% of the company didn't know what Juneteenth was. And it's not a Black holiday, it's an American holiday that we should be very proud of. And I wanted to make that very clear, because again, anything race-based in this country has become politicized. And I wanted to really disarm that. And it's something that we should be proud of as a holiday, for our country. And just talking about different cultural issues. And we talk about it very openly, because I don't want, there tends to be a lot of apprehension to talk about these sort of issues openly in companies. And I think that is a hindrance. The moment you open that gate, then I think things change very, very quickly. And those are just some of the things we've implemented, but it is not something that you change overnight. It's something that you have to work on continuously as a core principle in your company.
Thank you. Those are all really great. I assume also your training, that's all integrated into your training of new hires and even current employees, right? Really kind of.
Yeah, we're looking at everything. Just like every organization should. I joined this company really about 1.5 years ago, and just like any other company, it really wasn't a focus, and it just has to become one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, we have one more question. Let's see, how are we on time? We're 3 minutes past. We'll give it a couple more. Does the Hugh Society or the Roots Fund offer scholarships for existing wine industry employees who are Black or Brown to enhance their careers? For example, the WSET or management training, etc.
Absolutely. That is how we looked at being able to create real diversity, being able to fund scholarships, being able to provide financial backing for people who are already studying, as well as creating a framework for people to see like, oh, there are a lot of us in this industry, and you can come in too. But yes, we provide scholarships for WSET, CMS, wine schools, local wine schools in your city, because that's where I got my start from. The whole nine. And also Hughes Society, throughout next year, actually starting next month, we will be opening chapters in every city, to kind of function as a place for people to come and learn and get that kind of rooting as well. We'll be opening our first chapter next month in New York. And then we'll be heading on through there. And by going through the Hughes Society, becoming a chapter member, then you will have access to Roots Fund for the things that you need, because we have a closer relationship and we can see who needs what, how we need to kind of help you formulate your career and move forward with whatever your desire is to do in this industry. 100%, yeah.
And this is the reason why the relationship between the Hughes Society and the Roots Fund works very well, because there are things that legally a nonprofit like the Roots Fund can't do. And we didn't want to be limited. And we love the platform that Tahira had built with the Hughes Society. It was very honest. It was very pure. It really had become a safe space for Black Americans, both consumers and in the industry, to interact with wine on their own terms. So I said, why try to create something new when it already exists, and just empower what Tahira was already doing, to recruit and to help support events. The Hughes Society will also be helping to plan and operate all of our fundraising efforts. And it's become a really great sort of social network for the Black community in wine.
I love it. Very good. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I do want to encourage everyone to go to the website for the Roots Fund, and for Hughes Society as well. I was able to get a lot of really great information off of there. You can see, a little bit more detail written out to refer back to, as far as like all the scholarships and all of that, and those opportunities that you provide. So,
how can someone get involved with the Hughes Society?
I'm sorry, Mark, say that again.
So how can one get involved with the Hughes Society?
Shoot me an email. We can talk and figure out what that looks like, for sure.
Are you looking for sponsors as well?
Yes, always. A lot of the funding, in order to put on these programs, I always look for sponsors that are in alignment with what we're doing.
Okay, very good. I was supposed to be off the call a half hour ago, but it was so fascinating I stayed on.
Thank you.
Well, I will send out the recording, the slides with their information on it, and you guys can connect as well. So thank you everyone for your time today, and we look forward to the next time. And Carlton, Tahira, thank you so much for all of your information and for guiding us through this. And we hope to maybe hear back from you soon. Maybe we can schedule something else.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. It was so nice to meet you.